What word?
It's Hulk's YouTube name. Caviller. Cavalier definition. It's an alternate spelling of cavalier with one L. One who cavils. That's not useful. What does that mean? A disputant who quibbles. Someone who raises annoying, petty objections. Cavil. Is it like cavilled? To raise trivial or frivolous objections. Okay, that is not the word cavalier as I know it, but that's how I read it because.
All right.
Yeah. Anyways, I think we're live now at this point.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi, everybody. None of us ever get distracted here. We're always fully on business mode.
Yeah.
But hello and welcome.
I just noticed something on the new website and I'm reporting it in our bug report. So.
Oh, good. Is it a big bug or a little bug?
It's a little bug.
Okay, good. We're okay.
The images are not readable, and you can't click to expand them, so they're kind of useless.
Oh. Yeah, that's probably something we should fix. Being able to read images is so helpful.
It is.
Yeah, I always find it annoying when I go to a website and I want to copy some text, and then it drags the image. I go, no! Why is this an image? I just want the text, please. Foiled by some HTML.
That's not even an HTML problem. That's someone made the decision to use an image.
Yeah, we're just.
I did see a video recently of Do you know the track changes features on Google Docs and on Word Docs?
Mm-hmm.
Where it shows you what people have changed.
Yeah.
There was a lawyer on, I think, YouTube that was showing somebody went through and instead of using the track changes thing, used the clip art, word art things to draw over things. So instead of striking through a thing in a sentence, they would draw a line. And instead of removing something, they would put a big do not keep a circle with a line through it.
You made it so much harder for everybody who's trying to do the job.
Yep.
That's crazy. I did come across I think it was a video or something about bad UX, or intentionally terrible UX. I think you mentioned this. And
yeah, there's a whole subreddit about it.
Yeah, the buttons that move away from your mouse.
My favorite is when you the ones that are phone numbers, and you type in your phone number, and then it falls through and has to fall into the right place.
I like the slider for your phone number. You have to slide from
that one's fun, yeah.
bajillion. It's find your exact number. Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. Anyways, hello everybody. Welcome to our Q&A live stream for August. We are here to talk about some language learning stuff and things. And I hear that I'm noticing I'm getting some comments about my hair. It is indeed a company policy that I cannot cut it. That is a stipulation in my contract now.
It's true. Once every 3 months maximum.
I think it's been longer than that. I was doing the math the other day, and I don't think I've cut it since January.
It's January?
Yeah.
Dang.
Because I haven't gone to a barber since I've moved, and I moved in early February.
Mm-hmm.
So I must have cut it in January, or maybe December, but I think it was January.
Wow.
So we'll see. Can I go a whole year without going crazy? It doesn't bother me yet. It just goes crazy sometimes.
Yeah. I wish I could grow hair like that now. I've definitely, as I've gotten older, the top of my head has stopped growing, so it just comes out the sides.
That's kind of a good look. I mean, sort of what? Like a 90s cartoon style?
Yeah, like a Rick and Morty or a Doc Brown style.
Yeah, there you go. Doc Brown's iconic.
It's true. It's true. I can throw some baby powder in there and make it really gray.
That would be a fun sketch. I would watch that skit. Ethan, Doc Brown, some language learning crossover. I don't know.
Yeah.
But speaking of language learning, how is it going for you? What have you been up to? What are you working on?
I started going back to the Spanish meetup, so that's
Hmm.
been nice. It's been quieter than it used to. Like I stopped going like a year ago, and now coming back into it, it's definitely like more dead than it used to be.
Hmm.
Which is a bummer. Um, I've been trying to get into like a Spanish class because they offer free Spanish classes as part of the city college, and I'm like, oh, this would be a great opportunity to just speak regularly once a week. And it has honestly been a pain trying to get into the class, and they've denied me again. So I guess I'm not taking that class.
Denied.
Yeah,
That's too bad.
yeah.
It is
They
really
they
nice
only
to have.
offer intermediate, so like it wasn't. I don't think it would be like super useful, but um, and I talked to somebody who's in one of the intermediate classes, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that would not be suitable for me. But it would be like a nice opportunity to just like speak regularly with human beings rather than through a screen. So
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like having a set time every week to go do the thing kind of
exactly,
ensures that you're going to do the thing. I
exactly.
find that days that I have a check class, I can easily get my output goal of an hour. Easy.
Yeah,
Days that I
yeah.
don't, it's like I'm hard pressed to get 30 minutes.
I mean,
It's
when I
like
go to the
it's
meetup,
tough.
I'm there for 2 hours, so
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like the time flies away.
Time flies when you're speaking Spanish. Put that on
I
a
suppose
t-shirt.
so. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
so should we get some just some what? Well, should we get some well, should we get into some questions today?
try better, Ben.
I had one sip of my beer. Let's get to some questions.
Sounds great.
Hello. If you were to give us the simplest metrics for language progress, like words read, free flow listening hours, and focus listening hours, what would those benchmarks look like? So this person is looking to find the simplest ways to measure progress in a language. What is the simplest yet most concrete count of your ability in a language? It's more of like a philosophical question, I guess. I don't think we're
Yeah.
going to come to a perfect answer, but yeah,
Yeah, I
this
mean,
question
I
comes
think
from Sebastian, 1991.
thanks for the question, Sebastian. Um, the first metric that we focus on is vocabulary size. So, number of root words unconjugated that you know. Those generally break up into 5,000, 10,000, and 15,000 and above as the the benchmarks for that. Generally, like 5,000 is of passive, like being able to understand those in their conjugated forms. We would consider that's really the basic level of fluency. 10,000, you're doing really good. 15,000 is about what you need for the CEFR C2. Above that, you're basically getting into native speaker territory. In
Specialized
terms of,
native speaker territory.
yeah, so like
You have to,
college educated, you know certain specific, you have studied specific areas of something in the language. So I think that's probably the easiest one. Well, I say easy, except we still can't agree on what a word is. So, uh,
nobody can. It's been an open question in SLA for decades.
yeah.
What is a
But
word?
that's like the first one that like we are at least somewhat confident in. Then there is number of hours, but number of hours again, or a number of hours is sort of correlated with ability, but it is not actually representative of ability. So you can spend 100 hours doing an immersion activity, and another person can spend 100 hours doing a different immersion activity. You can have completely different results.
Yeah.
So you have to get really nitty gritty to understand like exactly what you're spending that time on. But hours is correlated. So generally, if you do for like a category one language, if you did 500 hours of reading and 500 hours of listening and 500 hours of speaking and writing, like you would be quite good at the language. There's no doubt about that. I think.
Well, if
Oh,
those
sorry, there
hours
is
are fully
doubt,
spent, like
depending on how you spend
that's the
that.
big question. Like one of the things we want to understand with the app is like how do hours spent on different activities versus focus levels really affect your actual progress or your actual ability?
Yep.
Because like the other number that they bring up in their question is words read, right? So if you've read a couple million words, right, what
Mm-hmm.
does that mean for your reading ability? And it depends on if you've always been doing harder and harder content, how much you're really understanding, right? Because I know when I'm about to go to sleep before bed, I'm not really fully comprehending the words that I'm reading. I'm kind of like in between sleep and just kind of looking at the words. It's like, does that count? Like, there's all these different questions with um, how good those hours are or that time spent is,
Yeah.
which is why this is a difficult question to answer, right? There's no real simple metric for saying, yeah, you're this good, because that's just not how languages work.
Yeah, you have to sort of analyze the quality of your immersion, like the content that you're immersing with, and then also the quality of your attention, how much attention you're paying and how much you're thinking about it. And the quality of the immersion um, has a bunch of different components, including sort of the density of known and unknown content,
Mm-hmm.
or the density of utterances or words or sentences within a certain period of time, if it's something like a TV show or a podcast. Um, and then also the domain in which it's in. Um, and then for more specialized skills, the difficulty of the actual medium itself. So the difference between someone speaking into a microphone with a script versus someone speaking in a loud auditorium off script where they're talking about whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of quality there that is different than, and it's separate. It's a separate dimension to measure from the actual content itself, the language content. So there are so many different components to measure that, that it's hard to really derive any significant insights without having much more strict test cases where we like
Mm-hmm.
instruct people what to do, which most people don't want to do. But you can think in terms of the quality of your own immersive experience. Generally, you always want to be pushing a little bit outside of your comfort zone. If you're working to grow your understanding, grow your ability, pushing outside your comfort zone is what you want to do, and that comfort zone can come from the ratio of known to unknown words, or the concepts that you're dealing with, or a different dialect that uses different slang or different meanings of words, or it can come from the quality of the actual media, like the audio quality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of
Yeah,
different factors to consider there.
I made a video a while ago about the idea of optimal input, which is one of the ideas that Krashen talked about. And there were, I think, 4 different aspects of creating high quality input. And I think there's kind of a split of like quality for you personally versus like quality linguistically. And things like density of actual like real language is really important, right? You would never learn a language if somebody was just repeating the same 5 words for 1,000 hours. That's not real language, even though it's part of the language. And questions like that. And so if your input is of high quality or closer to that optimal level, and you're focused on it, then hours is probably the simplest metric. That's what we mostly use in the community. Counting your active hours of focused immersion is generally the number that people throw out there. The next one is maybe like words read or something like that, but it's almost always hours. So, yeah. Thank you for the question, Sebastian. I think it's an interesting question that hopefully we can solve better. And I think we'll take a little detour from questions, from pre-made questions, because somebody asked in the chat, will we ever make an app? It was already answered, but I think we'll take this time to update on how our app is going. Ethan, do you have any interesting updates for us on the development of the app? I know you've been thinking about this way too much in the past couple of weeks or months.
Yeah. The app is in development. There's a whole video where we did a tour about it, so you should go check that out. There is also a waitlist if you want to join up and get access. The way that we're approaching it is generally with software, you don't really know what's going to happen when people get it in their hands. So we're trying to do it in iterative groups. So at first we were just using it internally, and then we launched to the moderators and admins. Now we've launched to a first batch of test users, and in each of those launches, we're collecting feedback to understand what is working and what isn't. And in that first launch, we realized a lot of stuff needed to be changed. So we basically spent the past 3 weeks reworking a lot of the information architecture of the app. But we're hoping that that'll be done in the next week or two, and then we'll do a bigger launch, probably to another 100 people, to go through the next phase and gather more feedback. Join the waitlist, and you can be included in one of the early iterations. And from there, one of the things that we learned was that we've created these categories in the guide. There's intensive reading versus free flow reading. So we've created these categories, and we've seen so much confusion in the community of like, what is active, what is passive, what is background, what is intensive, what is interactive. And we had hoped that we could create these categories as a way to group things together in a way that allowed us to guide people.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that it has just been a nonstop sinkhole trying to teach people what each of the categories are and how to categorize properly. So we've decided that that is a dead end. We are not going to go down that route. Instead, what we're going to do is we are going to list the activities that people actually do and know the names of, whether that is, reading with lookups or reading and listening with lookups. So we're going to present that to the end user because those things are self-explanatory, and we'll also add some descriptions in there to make them very clear. And then on the back end, we'll do the categorization to the abstract categories that we care about. And I'm hopeful that if we do that, we can eliminate a lot of the barrier of like needing to read all about our categorization system before you use the app. And that way you can just like send the app to people who don't know anything about Refold, and it will instruct them on how to spend their time and what types of activities are good, and then instruct them on how to do those activities. So it's a pretty substantial change to the way we were thinking about things, which is why we actually haven't done a lot of app releases in the past few weeks, because we've been really restructuring all of that information within the app.
Yep, I've seen the spreadsheets. There are lots of them.
They are extensive.
They are spread out. Spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets.
Cool. Well, thanks for the update.
Yep.
Let's get back to the real questions. Or that was a question, technically. It was just a very convenient question. But let's get back to the questions that people asked about broader language learning. Where's my question? Here it is. What do I do if I can't remember my Anki vocab? And this question comes from Trivette. And they ask, what do I do when I just finished doing my Anki for the day, but can't remember anything I just learned?
Yeah, Trivette, I did send you a pretty long answer in Discord. But I think based on the other context that you provided, I think that you're trying to do too much with your Anki. We include a lot of information on these Anki cards because all that information is important, but it's not all important right now. There are things that are more important to tackle first and then move on to the other things. Which is why for something like the JP1K, we focus on the meaning of the word. We don't focus on trying to remember the kanji until much later. Even though the kanji is included on the card, it's something that you don't grade yourself on. It's there just to get you exposure to the character. And so I think it is important to understand what exactly you're testing yourself on for a card. And I think in your case, you were trying to test yourself on 2 or 3 different things rather than on the one thing that is most important. So that's sort of the first thing that I would advise, is really narrow in and understand what you're testing yourself on and limit it to the thing that is most important. And then the other aspect is that Anki is only one half of the equation. You need to take what you learned in Anki and then go and do something with it outside. Whether
I'd say it's only a part of the equation, not even half. I think it's less than that.
I think early in the very beginner phases, it's about half. I think later on it drops. But okay, yeah. If I recall correctly, Trivette is just getting started. So it's really about you spend this time studying, and then you have to go use that new knowledge and information somehow. So if you're learning the kana, it's important to go out and either do like games with the kana, or play quizzes with it, or try and more likely try and read it. So sit down with a text in hiragana and try to read out and sound out the sounds, and then check whether you actually sounded it out correctly. So there's a couple different options there. If it's something like characters, same thing. There are games that allow you to test characters. You can try reading characters and then listen to how they sound within the context of an actual text.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people really like doing handwriting because it helps them remember the actual characters. The addition of handwriting can actually reinforce the memory. So there are additional things that you can do beyond simply the Anki portion of it to reinforce that. When it comes to vocabulary, actually seeing those words in context is a really good way to reinforce that. Some people swear by doing production later, so like using it in a sentence. And that's really important, I think, when you're further along, when you start crafting your own sentences.
Yeah.
Um,
That's like converting it from passive to active usability. It's more for like the vocab side.
Yeah, but some people do swear by that they remember it better passively when they've tried to remember it actively.
I could see
So,
that.
if you find yourself really struggling to remember something, generally if you're just studying recognition cards and learning to recognize and understand, you'll get, 80, 90% of those for free. Not for free, but without any additional effort. But beyond that, if there are certain trouble words, either letting them go for the time being or putting in additional effort to remember them, either one is an appropriate strategy.
Yeah, so the question usually is experience those words, immerse in those words, understand them, and then your Anki cards will cease to even feel like memorization. You just be like, yeah, I know this word. It's easy.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Thank you for the answer. Here we have another question about the Refold app. Any plans to make the app open source so that the community can add to the functionality? There seems to be quite a lot of devs in our servers. And then keep up the great work and thanks for all you do. This was asked by Really Big Manatee, a staple of the Spanish server.
Yeah, open source is always an interesting topic. There's a lot of open source or people who are very big proponents of open source in our community. I have not seen a lot of open source projects that have made it mainstream. There are a few, but typically they are taken on by some sort of for-profit partner that either contributes to the open source or branches off of it and builds on top of it themselves. Mm-hmm. And so we are a for-profit company and we are not a nonprofit. And I would be concerned about making it open source because I don't think that it would be sustainable as a business long term. Most of the sustainable open source things that I've seen have been sort of tools, services on top of an open source product. And that is just not a model that really works for us.
My understanding is that a lot of like the big things are sort of like the foundational stuff, like a programming language or really big things that we almost think of as the underlying fabric of the internet might be open source, but like specific tools and apps usually aren't. They might be, I think things like Firefox might be, but even that is not, I wouldn't call mainstream, like you said.
It's also, owned by a nonprofit that earns tons of revenue from, or not revenue, but gets a lot of grants and funding in order to pursue that. And they also have their own revenue that they generate.
Part of their shtick.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is about sort of crafting a really solid app experience for the target demographic that we're going for. A lot of the open source devs are going to want to contribute the tools and features that they care about, but that might not be what actually makes the app most successful for the average learner, like your mom, a non-technical person. And so creating like a really coherent, simple interface and workflow and experience of the app is sort of that's what we're trying to prioritize because we think that's how it's going to be most applicable to the average person. And what I've seen with a lot of open source tools and software is that they have a long wish list and people start to add things to it that are ostensibly good ideas and might be good for some people, but end up just confusing the overall system for the average learner.
A spaghetti monster sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
No, there's a spaghetti code. There's a term for it or something like that.
There is spaghetti code. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It is.
But that's sort of a separate issue. That's around like code quality, which is another thing
Right.
you have to consider. I'm more thinking of like Anki is like a really powerful tool, but it will never be simple because making something simple requires it requires you to do a lot of stuff that is boring.
Yeah.
Right? You have to like take a lot of stuff away and take out features, and you have to document things, and you have to think about like the end user's experience. And that's always been sort of my concern with open source is that people work on the things that get them excited, which obviously they should. Those are the things that they want to volunteer their time for. But a lot of the stuff that is required ends up being quite boring and is things that people are not interested in. And I think that it's a lot easier to pay someone to do that than to ask them to volunteer their time for that.
Yep. What about plugins or some sort of system so that if somebody did want to do something just for themselves and 5 other people, they could?
Yeah, potentially. We've definitely thought about creating one of the things that we're planning to add to this whole system is basically a analysis of your knowledge within the language according to the system that we've created. And we have definitely thought about, okay, what would this look like if it was sort of the central repository of here is what we think you know, and other tools or services could actually import that information to customize their experience. So you can imagine jumping into Link right now, you have to like mark all the things that you know, or jumping into Miyaki, you have to mark all the things that you know. But if we can get really good at estimating what you know and what you don't, and measuring it with measuring your ability level, then we could provide basically a map of your knowledge to whatever other tool wants to import it to make their experience better. So we have thought about doing something like that.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind is about my favorite free and open source tool for language learning is Loot. And one thing that really makes a lot of sense for like people to submit is adding more languages, because the system has to learn how to parse the language, what the kinds of characters it uses, things like that, which aren't super complicated, but one person can't input the 500 languages or whatever if they wanted. So an actual individual learner might build up, say, oh, okay, this is what we use, here's some basic stuff about the language. This is the profile. I'll then submit it as a default language now. And now there's a whole bunch of languages that you can just preload. It already has dictionaries, word parsing, all those sorts of things.
Sure.
And that makes sense to me, but adding like features and other stuff definitely is like a more difficult part.
Yeah, I mean, there have been plenty of things where we're like, oh, this would be a great feature. Nope, we're not going to build it, or we're going to build it and rip it out.
Yeah. That's what features are for, getting rid of.
Yeah,
that's
basically
what Google does all the time.
Well, I don't want to use Google as the example. They tend to neglect a lot of their features and
No.
tools.
What do you mean? Day 500,000 of me asking to be able to control my own audio settings in Google Meets.
Yes. Yeah. No, but the quote I like is perfection is when there is nothing left to remove.
Well, I mean, I get the philosophy there, but also like you could just remove everything and then you would have nothing. So is nothing perfect? Is that what you're saying?
That is not what I'm saying.
Okay.
If you have nothing, that is not a product.
I mean,
unless you're into like, mindfulness and Zen, in which case nothingness is a product.
Or there's plenty of companies that have sold you just absolute nothing. People will be like, yeah, I'll buy that. And they get it and like, this is a nothing burger. This is a whole lot of nothing.
Like Supreme.
Yeah. Or the failed AI products that everybody's like, oh, this is terrible. I spent $100 on this. Why?
Yeah, but that's not nothing. That's something terrible.
Fair enough. Anyways,
Yeah.
this is not on topic. My bad.
No.
Thank you for the question, Gigantic Manatee. And we'll go on to the next question here from Tempted Fate. And they ask, when is it time to level up my immersion? Currently, they're learning Arabic and have been immersing mostly in news and political content. The general subject was the reason that they wanted to learn the language in the first place. So there's greater ambiguity for them when watching these sorts of things when compared to children's cartoons. But they're fairly comfortable with that ambiguity.
Okay.
They feel, but however, that at around 600 hours of immersion, they might be jumping too quickly from cartoons and anime to higher level content, or that potentially focusing on the subject that they're interested in could come at the cost of not building up other kinds of vocabulary. Should they just stick to what they're doing and consuming the content that they should they stick with consuming content that they understand at least 60% of, and then once they're actually understanding everything, then jump to the bigger things, or continue with the things that are more engaging to them now? Sort of a
We generally prioritize engagement over all else.
Yeah.
If you're doing something that is comprehensible but boring, you're not going to stick with it. So it is better to choose something that is less comprehensible but is very engaging. We really want to focus on making sure that you are excited and interested in the things that you are consuming, because that is going to lead to the best outcome. That is going to help you learn the fastest. Even if the content is not perfect for your level of engagement will make it better than another piece of content that you were not engaged in.
Yeah.
So I would say if you want to jump into that content because that is what is actually interesting to you, then do it. Use all the tools that you can to make it as comprehensible as possible. That will help to bridge the gap so that you can consume that content and actually get something out of it. But over time, it's not so much about leveling up your immersion. It's actually about reducing your dependence on the tools to understand. So, maybe you start by looking up tons and tons of words, or looking up entire sentence translations, and then over time you drop sentence translations, and then you drop looking up words at all, or you drop down to looking up only one word per sentence. You're trying to reduce your dependence on these helpers that and force yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable with it. So, yeah, I think what you're doing is totally fine. I would recommend that you continue going with the thing that's actually keeping you engaged.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add in is that you can also mix things up. If you want to do a cartoon a day plus everything else is your desired content, go for it. You can have very different things during your immersion. But then the other thing is that I don't know if you're worried or maybe nervous about missing, what I think you said something in here of coming at the cost of not building up other kinds of vocabulary. Because a very large part of a language is the same in all domains, in all areas. Even in books or stories that feel very specific, right? Like watching something like Star Wars or Harry Potter, a very small portion of those words are actually things like wizard and lightsaber. Most things are still like the, it, him, my friend, oh my God, stuff like that or whatever is almost always going to be the same across domains. But then also the added reason that you started learning this language because you're interested in something specific means that those words are way more important to you, even if they're really rare in the broad scheme of things. That's not how you say it. The grand scheme of things. Because you're learning the language to do something, so you should learn to do that thing, right? That's my opinion.
Yeah, learn what's important to you.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. We have a question here from Enter the Void in chat. And they asked, how do I fix my sounds awareness in a language that I'm already quite advanced at? In this case, English. So they say that they can hear both TH sounds, so th and the distinctly, but they don't hear z the same way most of the time. So I assume that they hear it as a allophone of s, right? So these is how they would hear instead of these. Do you want to answer anything, or should I take it?
I mean, this is your
Yeah.
field of interest, so I'm happy to let you take it. I have some opinions on it, but I feel like yours are probably more informed.
The first thing is that you can do is do minimal pair training, so to train yourself to hear specific things. Thankfully for English, there's really, really good minimal pair trainers out there. I don't have any off the top of my head, but you can look them up. The other thing is to learn a little bit more about maybe the specifics, because you might learn that z in English, this phoneme z, does get devoiced, which means that it actually sounds like s at the ends of certain words. Like that is fairly common. And so learning about some of these things might help you improve your awareness of the subtlety, because if you didn't magically acquire a sound early on, a little bit of conscious knowledge of it and then refocusing on that sound can just unlock it, and you go, oh, I get it now. I actually had understood most of it. There was just some places that were really difficult for me to understand. So that's a good thing that can also help, is learning a little bit more about the depth of the sound. And then the other one that I think is really important is chorusing, like doing that sound and finding places where you go, okay, I heard this sound 3 times in this little sentence. I'm going to practice saying it and matching it with how the native sounds. Then you can ask another native, or maybe the same one, I don't know. Ask them if it sounds correct. Because if you're focusing on a specific sound and you think it sounds good, but they don't, that also sort of reinforces your brain to go, okay, I'm off a little bit here. How can I fix that? It's not a perfect solution. There's going to be some work involved that you're going to have to do, but I think it's interesting at the very least and isn't that difficult. And they also said that they have learned that in Canadian English, S changes the vowels. This little thing is, why can't I read your message?
I'm
just reading. I'm just reading it wrong. I'm just illiterate.
Okay.
I also know that in Canadian English, S changes the vowel altogether. And so I'm working on it already. And so, yeah, I would just say continue doing that. It might be frustrating in the beginning when you can't do it, but if you are focused on it and then you get to a lot of listening and you do start to hear it, you will just start to do it at some point. If you don't just start to do it at some point, you can force yourself to do it, and that helps, especially if you want to sound more natural. That can be another way to do it. But once you're practicing it readily, it becomes a lot more obvious. And in my experience, that has helped people pick up sounds much faster. Is when you're actually working on it, you pick it up, you figure it out, and then it goes, okay, there's a certain point it clicks. But it is not a 100% guaranteed path that will always work every time. You have to find your way, weave your way through the weird sounds of English. So
There's a lot of them.
Yep. There are a lot of sounds in English. Depending on the dialect, there's more or less, but there's well over 40 for every dialect, which is a lot.
What's a comparison, like with Spanish?
Spanish also has like 30. It depends on how you count, because if you count like I as a different sound as a and e, which it kind of functions as a different one, there's like 30 something, like 35, 36. I don't remember off the top of my head. But English in the grand scheme of things isn't actually that crazy. German and French have so many vowels that it's like off the charts numbers. There's plenty of languages all over the world that have an insane number of sounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly varied. But in terms of like really, really big popular languages, popular and widely spoken languages, English is kind of odd in some of the sounds that it has, which is also interesting. I don't know. It's cool. You learned a cool language. Good job. Good choice.
Are you talking to me or this person?
You.
Oh, okay.
Also, this person.
Also.
Yeah, I guess. To enter the void. Oh, here's an interesting question. I'm going to go to chat again. So Courtney says that they've been listening to podcasts from Spain, and they're really easily able to understand things, even though like it's for native speakers
Cool.
and at an advanced level.
Congrats.
But they just went to Spain and had a lot of trouble understanding real life Spaniards.
Yeah.
Why?
I feel you. I feel this problem a lot. So what I have found is that when people speak just in the street, they mumble and they talk very fast, and they just like they just I guess they just devoice a lot of the sounds that you would expect. They don't enunciate particularly well. And the context of being on the street is very different than the context of being in a podcast. When you understand what the podcast is about or the context of the conversation generally, and they're speaking clearly into a microphone, it is easier to follow that than if you bump into somebody on the street and they immediately start talking to you about something. Actually, somebody in our course server posted a video of Ben talking on one of our videos versus an interview between two people, and he was like, I can understand Ben perfectly, and I cannot make any sense of what's happening in this conversation, even though both of them were mic'd up and the audio quality was great. And the difference was Ben had written a script that had clear ideas that were clearly expressed, whereas this conversation, the person speaking, they would talk about an idea and then go off on a tangent and then go off on another tangent and then come back to the main idea. And so it wasn't enough to just follow one sentence at a time or understand the broader context. You had to keep multiple different contexts in your head in addition to the entire past 30 seconds or 1 minute of the conversation, all readily available so that you could follow all the different trains of thought that were happening. So it wasn't even an issue of the language being difficult. It was an issue of this person was not expressing their ideas with a clarity of thought that was easy to follow.
There's something in linguistics called like careful speech versus, I don't actually remember the opposite of it, but careful speech is basically when somebody's more aware of what they're saying. And there is a marked difference between how people speak in careful speech versus just regular speech. And it's an unconscious thing. Everybody does it. Like, I think it was a fairly famous study where somebody would ask people to like tell a story just about their life, usually something that was like more emotional, and it would record and listen to it. But then also ask that same person to like read something or to quote something or something like that, where it's a lot more mentally intensive, and sounds would change all over the place. This person would just say these sounds differently, depending on if you're thinking or not. And so that is one of the reasons why the same person might sound different in different contexts. But then also there's that added level of, at a certain point, we do just speak in ideas, right? If you haven't prepared ahead of time, like a script, or you're trying to get a point across, it's edited down to be more understandable. If you're just trying to say stuff and get it out there and hang out with your friend or whatever, there's a lot more stuff going on. And for me, what's helped understand that easier, so understanding like market vendors and following conversations out in the street, has actually been focusing less on the words and the sentences and more just on the meaning, because that is easier to follow along with. If you're sort of with the conversation and listening to the person who's speaking, you can usually figure out what's happening and follow along and make a joke and whatever. And that's relatively normal, versus if you're trying to say, okay, I'm learning Spanish, I'm here in Spain, I'm going to listen to this person, I got to understand the words and then figure it out. And then you miss a couple words, you go, oh no, what's happening, right? There's this different level of ability that requires some more abstraction, I think is a good word.
And I would say also inference of
Yeah.
meaning that is separate from the actual words being used.
Yes.
Because if somebody only gives you a third or half of what would otherwise be a complete sentence, you have to be able to infer the other half of the sentence,
Yeah.
not by the words, but the meaning of the entire sentence. So there's an enormous amount of inference that your brain has to do in order to practice understanding people on the street, because they don't speak often in complete ideas, and they don't say all of their words, or they don't finish their sentences.
Yeah.
So
It's more real, right?
yeah. So, it can definitely prepare you. Listening to a podcast will prepare you for the real world, but only up to a certain level. At a certain point, you really do have to just go and talk to people in real life. When there is music in the background, or cars on the street, or they are mumbling and not completing their words, or they're talking in a different direction. All of these things create artifacts in the language that are really difficult to make it difficult to parse the actual sort of correct version of what they're saying if you were to transcribe it. And you'll see this in like transcriptions, where sometimes you just won't be able to hear what people say, and then it'll say like just inaudible. And it's even though that word was inaudible, the sentence as a whole is understandable.
Yeah.
So it is definitely a challenge, and I feel for you, because I experienced the exact same thing. Like, trying to understand some of the like the folks that I run into like at the park or on the street, speaking Spanish. Oh man, some of them are just like, they speak so low, and so their words just run together in a way that is unusual for like an actual piece of content where someone has a microphone and is enunciating. It's just a completely different skill set, honestly.
Yeah. But that's part of the reason we do it, right?
Yeah.
I was transcribing a couple of clips from my Czech lessons to put in the upcoming video about my output. And there's one where it's very clearly like she's started to say like 3 different sentences. And so it was like a bunch of random stuff, then it all came together. And so I just wrote out like one of those versions, basically. I'm still checking to make sure that it's correct with the native, but like clips like that sort of show that, yeah, you sometimes have a couple of ideas at once. Your mouth gets ahead of your brain, then your brain catches up and says, no, we're saying this thing, right? And it just happens, right? Even if you're trying to be relatively careful. So
yeah, language is super messy.
Yeah. The options to fix that, or to help it, to improve it, are to have more real conversations with people in that kind of scenario, and to also be comfortable with making more inferences and guessing, because that's going to happen, especially like Ethan said, if there's noise in the background, or you just can't hear something, right? They're behind, like I went to the market yesterday, and there was a big fan going behind me. The fish vendor had a mask on, and but I understood the conversation fine, mostly because I was guessing off of keywords. Like, I couldn't actually hear a damn thing he was saying, but I could see his demeanor, I could catch a few words, and that was more than enough to have an understandable conversation.
But you couldn't transcribe it.
No, I would just be like, fish, 66 pesos. So like, that's the entire conversation.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then, I'll sometimes find recordings of like, either people talking together without individual microphones, or in a hall where there's like echoing.
I hate that.
Yeah. Or it's like La Cotorrisa, when they have like multiple guests on, and there are 4 or 5 people talking and telling jokes simultaneously. Like, that is really hard to understand. There's an Argentinian podcast called La Venganza Será Terrible, and it's many of them seem to be recorded with like a bunch of people sitting at a table in a giant like auditorium, and it's very hard to understand. But when I was doing some preparation for the CFR, they actually have audio that is like really poor quality that you need to be able to understand, like the whole context of the conversation, and it's often like one microphone in an entire panel of people,
Mm-hmm.
trying to talk and
That's
about some topic. It is
horrendous.
really hard to understand.
Yeah, as somebody with hearing problems, I hate that.
Yeah.
I cannot stand just awful audio. Even in English, it'll yeah. Okay. We have another question from the prepared questions that I want to get to.
Yep.
This one comes from Eric Less is More, and they ask. Oh, I lost it.
Boo.
It's the subs one. Nope, not this one. This one. Should I use subs on the first or second watch through? So I have a question regarding immersion. I'm kind of advanced in English, but struggle to understand some things like TV shows or movies without subtitles. But my tolerance for ambiguity is also not that great. So I've been playing around with two different possibilities. Watching something without subs first to practice listening, and then rewatching it now with subtitles, or to watch something with subtitles and then rewatch it without the subtitles to train listening second. What is the better option? One or two?
I would say that if you're in the vocabulary building phase, watching it with subtitles and then listening without, or re-listening to it, is a really powerful way to reinforce the new vocabulary. If you're focusing on building your listening ability, listening to it first without subtitles, and then going back and going through and finding the words that you don't know, and checking your understanding is really valuable. The other thing that you can do is both of them simultaneously, where you do an intensive listening first and then reading. So every sentence you're listening to it and then checking whether you heard it properly. So that's sort of a mix between the two, but generally depends on what you want to focus on. So it sounds like, based on the fact that you're an advanced learner, that you're focusing on listening, you should be listening first and then going back through with the subs.
Yeah, I would just do intensive listening at that point.
Yeah.
But if you like rewatching things, then I guess that's good enough. It's totally fine to watch one that without subs and then with subs.
Yeah, you can then also
But
listen to it again after the fact, just to reinforce everything.
I have a video about the multipass method, which is where you go through in 5 or 6 different ways on the same piece of content.
Yeah.
Side note, I do like to have a go-to piece of content like that for like off days, sick days, or whatever. Because like I have the Into the Spider-Verse in check that I can watch at any time to get like an hour and a half of immersion in. That's really easy, fun. It's one of my favorite movies, top 10, I think. And so having something like that you do know pretty well that you can get on any day, I also really like about multiple watch throughs. So if you do this like with an entire TV show or something, saving that in your back pocket to come back to someday in the future, rewatching The Office is a thing that native speakers do all the time.
When I'm brain dead, I rewatch The Magicians in Spanish.
The Magicians?
Yeah.
Is that the
sci-fi
Is
show?
that what I'm thinking of? Yeah, I don't know it by name. It might be. I didn't know that was your go-to thing.
Well, I mean, Harry Potter was my go-to thing, but I kind of got tired of it, so.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm so
after the 4th listen, I'm like, I can move on to other things.
only 4, first time. Yeah. Anyways,
4 in Spanish. I've listened to it like 20 times in English.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a lot in Spanish. I
Yeah.
did not like the audiobooks in Spanish. I was really annoyed by the amount of times that the narrator did something different than what is said in the book. Just like there was a couple times where it's like he does a super deep gravelly voice, and then the next line says he said in a high squeaky voice. Like, what? That's just wrong.
Which narrator? Because I've listened with 3 different narrators.
Oh, I didn't know there were multiple.
Yeah,
because the
first one that I found was like the official Spanish one, and then I found an unofficial Spanish one, and then I found the official Latin American one.
Mm-hmm. That's the one I've listened to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So,
I don't like.
There are different ones.
Whatever.
Yeah. Either that or Pixar movies. Pixar movies are always a go-to.
Those are great. Those are also highly quoted in at least Mexico, but I'm sure in other Spanish-speaking countries because they have good dubs.
Yeah.
The Monsters Inc. dub is, I think, better in Spanish. I think it is funnier in Spanish.
There are a lot of things that I watch in Spanish, and then I go and like look at clips in English. I'm like, this is terrible in English. This is only good in Spanish.
Yep. It's the quality of the dub is important for the quality of the media.
Of course.
Although I can get behind like bad dubs of good movies. Like the Terminal dub in Spanish is, I think it's just 2 voice actors for all the characters. I kind of love it. It feels like a couple of people like in a room recording a movie they like. It's sort of fun. But to answer your question, I forgot who asked this. We already answered it. Look at this off screen. We're going off the rails. It's almost 5 o'clock. We're almost done here.
Can't take us anywhere.
No. We've been doing too much workage. Okay, so we have another question here to finish up with from the chat from Mr. AfricTube. Why is the C capitalized? It's Afri and then capital C tube. AfricTube. AfricTube? Interesting username. Anyways, stage 3 talks about immersing with a language parent. And so should we do free flow since YouTube subs aren't accurate? Or is there a good way to interact with your language parent? In my experience, a language parent is supposed to be used without subs. When you're just vibing with their words, you're trying to figure out their patterns of speech, understanding most things, and just listening. So I wouldn't say that you should be doing a language parent and if you need subs. And it's better to focus on being able to listen and pick up regionalisms or their own idiolect, whatever the personal dialect is. Like that sort of thing, I think is more important for a language parent than like learning new vocab, for example.
Yeah, I found that I haven't done language parenting in a long time. I actually should probably try that again. But I tried to use Luisito Comunica back in the day.
Weird choice.
His podcast is what I was trying to use.
Oh,
is that not like his?
Or is he a new one now?
I don't know, but this was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I guess what I found is that when I tried to say what he said, I realized that I didn't know all of the filler words that were going on. And so that's why the only reason that having the accurate subtitles is helpful, because sometimes they will say something, and this is something that happens in your native language too, where you'll say something and someone will be like, what? And then you'll slow down and say it word by word. And in reality, when you said it the first time, you missed a whole bunch of words. And so there is this question of like, should you try to imitate the person the way that they said it? Even though technically what they are actually saying is something that is bigger or there are more pieces to it. Or should you try and imitate the full version, or should you have an understanding of both of them? And so, at least at the time, I was struggling to deal with that mismatch between what they were actually saying versus what the full version would have been. Hi, Kitty. And so it can be helpful to have the actual subtitles for that purpose. But yes, as Ben said, generally you just want to be listening to what they're saying and basically imitating them. I know that like when I was a kid, I would listen to my favorite comedians and I would just memorize what they would say in exactly the way that they would say it. Just because that was intonation. Same intonation, same pacing, same everything.
I definitely know some John Mulaney bits like that.
Yeah. Dude, I know so many John Mulaney bits, Patton Oswalt bits. Emo Phillips is my favorite because he has the weirdest like intonation and prosody.
That's funny. Another one that I
But
definitely listen to a lot of is Brian Regan, I think is his name. Yeah, that sounds right.
it sounds familiar.
It's got just like a couple of sketches that I just know for some reason. But
But you're trying to get to that level where you can hear what they are saying and then repeat in the same way that they said it what they said. You're trying to imitate them and their persona, and then eventually move on to being able to express yourself in that same persona. Though I would not say that I have actually ever actually reached that with a parent. Though I think it might actually be a good time to go back and try that again.
I did find it
But
useful when I was focused on one speaker. I've since sort of distanced because he's sort of very norteño, and I sound a lot more chilango now.
Mhm.
But it was very useful for getting that flow, those vibes, the more casual vocabulary and grammar. Actually, was very useful from that. But I have the problem now that my chosen language parent in Czech that I'm probably going to use is just cooler than I am, and I don't know how to get
Doesn't
around
sound like a
that.
problem.
I, but like, I can't be like cool. I don't know. He's just cooler than I am.
You're
It's
cool,
just true.
Ben.
Oh, thanks, Ethan.
You're cool to me.
Thanks, boss.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, mom. Yeah, actually, it's funny when my mom comments on YouTube videos. Like, look, mom, I'm on TV.
Yeah.
I also did see I think my cousin sent me a picture. No, my grandma sent me a picture of my cousin showing his new baby son, like one of my videos. It's like, he's one. He can't understand anything. But
Hey, it's language
it was
acquisition, right?
language acquisition, baby.
Literal language acquisition, baby.
That's what they do. They just absorb
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Little creatures. Yeah. This creature does not absorb words very well.
No.
He's not very perceptive. Want to say hi?
Side note, have you seen the dog buttons? The dogs that can talk with buttons?
Yeah.
I
Some
wonder if
dogs are
there's any
smart.
cats that have.
Cats are way too lazy. They would not. They would not engage in that way.
I don't know.
Like, they come up to me and they like meow and say like hello, but I just
Some
feel
cats
like
are very vocal.
I don't know if they care enough to try to get their ideas across.
But
You
the
a creative
I
person?
recently saw a video of the person that Hunger for Words is the Instagram channel, and she was like, "What is the process of teaching your dog to talk?" And the first one was like, "There's an input phase." I was like, "Yes."
Yes.
So there's like a you have to say the word to the dog and hit the button at the same time, and like you have to do that for multiple months before they make the connection between them.
Yeah, animal human language interaction is actually pretty interesting,
Mhm.
fairly controversial as well, because some people do believe that they actually can like acquire language. And there was like that whole thing with the chimp that could sign,
Mhm.
all but it just didn't have the same faculties of like creation of recursive sentences and like real ideas. And it would just like spam walk, 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 food, me now, walk, walk, right? But it is cool that they can at least do that, right? I don't know,
Yeah.
but
I mean, there was a Neil deGrasse Tyson episode where he demonstrated that the dog
Degrassi?
Degrassi.
I've never heard it Degrassi. Like
What would you call
Degrassi
it?
Hill, DeGrasse. Always heard it Neil deGrasse Tyson.
It's Neil deGrasse Tyson.
So it's spelled, but English
Yeah.
is a fucked up
No,
language.
it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. You're dropping the I for some
Really?
reason.
Am I wrong?
I think so. Anyways, he had an episode where he demonstrated a dog had induction capabilities. So it could,
Like
or rather,
heat?
deduction, not induction.
Oh.
Deduction. Where it could like figure out the name of things through process of elimination. And it
Mhm.
knew like 1,500 names of different like stuffed
That's a
animals.
lot.
Yeah, so super smart dog. And he demonstrated like, hey, this is a thing that we thought only humans had, this process of deduction, but like the dog has this ability and has demonstrated it.
Okay, we're getting confirmation from chat. I am right. It's DeGrasse Tyson.
What?
From 2 people.
What? Am I wrong?
Neil deGrasse Tyson, pronunciation DeGrasse, or in UK, DeGrasse. And then JCat says Ben is right. So I am the greatest.
I feel like everyone calls him with like sounds out the E.
What are you,
Or maybe I'm just hearing it wrong every time.
confirmation bias? No, that's not what that is. There's a thing where you hear stuff that you think you know or something.
Now I have to search like. Shoot, what's the
Youglish?
The word Youglish? That's it.
Yeah, Youglish is so useful.
It is. All right,
Wait,
well, we're gonna have to debate this or find proof. Of
Everybody's
this.
saying I'm right, so.
I know. I guess I'm wrong.
Oh, and then okay, we got a confirmation from AfricTube. That's just how you say it. That's not a typo. It's AfricTube, by the way.
AfricTube. Okay.
Yeah. Good. We're getting good confirmations here. Do you want to take one more question? We have somebody.
Sure.
We have a question from Jesus.
So now I really want to like just look up a whole bunch of people saying Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Until you find one person that proves you're right, then
Exactly.
Jackson would be like, "You're wrong."
Haha! I found the one result that works.
Yeah. I just used Youglish the other day because Mr. Salas asked me if it was natural to say you have the possibility to do something. Because he's like, to me, that's not weird. And I was like, it's kind of weird. Having a possibility is like a little off. You say have the opportunity, or there is the possibility. And I looked it up on Youglish, and there was 10 times the results for have the opportunity than possibility. And when you hear possibility, it's a little bit weird. Again, language is super flexible.
I wouldn't have called it out, but
yeah, apparently somebody told him that it sounded weird, and he's like, "It does." And then I'm apparently his go-to native speaker, so kind of interesting.
Well,
but the question from Jesus Gil is, how long does it take for a European language speaker to become fluent in Japanese to basic functionality? And sorry if this is not a great time and place to ask this kind of question, but they are a fellow software engineer. That's not how they phrase it. I added that in for weird comedic effect, but generally,
it depends what you mean by basic conversational fluency or basic functionality.
Yes. But if you want to like be able to go to cafes and order and understand pretty much everything that people say back to you in like a conversational sense, it does take a pretty long time for a language like Japanese, just because of the sheer difference from a language like a European language. I think one of the numbers that we float is like 1,800 or 2,000 for like low, like hours for low level fluency, just because not only do you have to relearn basically everything, because all the words are different, there's completely different writing systems, completely different grammar, but there's also just things that are so foreign to European languages that you can't like apply, be like, oh, this is kind of like that thing. There's so many things in distant languages that are just have no real way except for an entire paragraph of explanation. It's like, this single little character has this whole paragraph of explanation. This is the shortest it can possibly be. Like, that just happens all the time. And that takes a big chunk of time.
I actually recently saw a video of if English was spoken the way Japanese is spoken. Where
really hard to understand.
It was interesting. it was a very interesting little short.
Because yeah, if you do that with Spanish or with a language that's a lot closer, it's not insanely weird. You're like, okay, the word order is a bit off. It sounds kind of fancy, but it's not crazy. Like in Czech, if you want to say, if it was nice, I'd go outside, like sort of conditional thing. The direct like translation would be, Would when it were nice, went would I outside. Which is very like strange in English, but you get it. You can be like, okay, I follow more or less, but it's just so different in other languages.
Yeah.
Or in distant languages, rather.
I still want to create the syntax class. Like,
I mean, it exists. Like, they're just very linguistic and kind of ugly.
No, but like a mapping of let's translate a language into English, but using the original grammar of
Yeah,
of the language.
that's a gloss.
Yeah, but like doing it for like pieces of content, like any arbitrary piece of content.
Oh, why?
Oh, just I think it's neat to see the grammar that way.
Oh, okay.
I feel like it just helps you understand like what the different pieces of grammar mean and what they are and how they work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is helpful to go, okay, I'm seeing how these are functioning. That's what I'm struggling with right now, is to really wrap my head around how Czech cases are used, because it's so specific to meaning, like what you're trying to say, but then also the ways that you say things have different implications because it's the different language. Like the one thing that I came across today was, oh wait, what was the example? The example that I came across today was, to understand something. That is not like, doesn't function as I am understanding something. It's like I am almost giving my comprehension to this thing. Is sort of how it like functions grammatically.
Sure.
Sort of like when you go to a language where instead of saying I like that, you say me gusta, like it pleases me almost.
Yep.
Where it's like you have to like this, what feels like a common idea is just flipped on its head.
Yeah.
And
the direction of action is opposite.
Opposite or even just different. Right? Because in this case, you are still understanding, but you're not really understanding it. You're understanding to it. Right? It's weird.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I'll have to read your Czech guide.
Yeah. I'm working on it, but this thing is hard.
Yeah.
I don't get why Czech has 3.5 genders. It literally has feminine, neuter, and then 2 masculines that are slightly different. Why? It's so annoying.
I don't know. Maybe 2 languages merged, or 2 similar languages were just like, we're just merging them together.
I think it must have been every gender have this distinction of living versus non-living, and then it just kind of lost it in feminine and neuter because it was just close enough or something. It's so just I don't know. It's hard to really wrap your head around.
Grammar's weird.
Grammar's wild. But it's also cool. I've been working on like diagrams for it. So I found this interesting grammar guide, which is way too long, almost 300 pages on Czech cases. Jesus. But it has like cool little diagrams to like show how a case is like functioning. So you have like your line of action, and then if the thing is being used to complete that line of action, it's in the 7th case, right? And you get these actually helpful diagrams. But then the problem is when something isn't like obviously in that diagram. What do you do when you're talking about time? Is that part of a whole, or is that a direction? Like, it's a whole thing. Anyways, I'm going off on a weird tangent at this point. We should probably end the stream.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Sorry for rambling like a madman. It's going with my hair at this point. But yeah, you want to sign us off, Ethan?
Thank you, everybody. If you're interested in trying the app, head on over to the app waitlist, and we hope to see you on there. And there's lots of feedback forms and whatnot all over the place, so please send us your thoughts and feelings about how it goes. We're definitely trying to learn as we go. think we're trying to get at least 4 or 5 major iterations in before the end of the year. So any of your feedback would be appreciated.
Yeah. Well, have a fantastic rest of your evening, morning, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you around.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.